welcome to Cool People on Substack, my new podcast where I, Substack coach, interview amazing people who produce content on Substack. For those of you tuning in on external platforms like Spotify and YouTube who have only heard of Substack, perhaps a brief introduction. Substack is a content platform founded in 2017. Originally created around long-form writing, Substack has grown to include video and audio in various ways. And the people here are amazing. You can find almost anything on Substack, and as a Substack coach, I've assisted hundreds of people in the past 3 years and met creators from all over the world. Today, with the launch of my podcast, I'm inviting Adrian Landin, world traveler and storyteller, to share his Substack with gusto and talk about his experience on Substack so far. Let's get started. Welcome, Adrian. I'm just really happy to have you here today, and as my first guest on Cool People on Substack, since you are a cool person who travels all over the place and does so many exciting things, from someone who's always stayed in her home country and ventured out a few miles once or twice. Your life is very exciting. So I am happy to hear more about yourself and what you do, about your Substack. We've even so I sent out the announcement ahead of time saying who was going to be my first guest. I've had a few clients since then actually talking to me and saying, hey, I'm really excited about this podcast, and I checked out Adrian's Substack, and I always trip up when I say your name because it's the same name as mine. But they've checked out your Substack and they're excited to kind of meet you and see what you're all about. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and where you're from and all those sort of beginner things.
Yeah, first off, thank you for having me. I feel honored to be here. My name is Adrian Landin. I am originally from Dallas, Texas. I was born and raised in Dallas. And at the tender age of 25, I graduated from college and had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew that I didn't want to be here. And just by chance, I met a friend who was a professional model, and he was telling me about some of his adventures. And I asked him, do you think that's something I could do? And he was like, absolutely. So from that moment, my life has never been the same. He coached me. This is way before smartphones, this is right when email broke. So, yeah, my first couple adventures out into the world, I only communicated with my family via a phone with a cord and email. But yeah, that was my first time to leave home, and I went and traveled Western Europe, and I knew that my life would never be the same. I was instantly hooked on different languages and places and architecture, and the money was different. It was so easy to hop on a train and be in a different country and culture and food and all of that. So that began something I had no idea that I would still be doing it 20 plus years later. But that's sort of how things kicked off for me.
Yeah, that must have been quite overwhelming for the very first time, or was it just straight up fun?
To be honest with you, it was overwhelming. In fact, I have a story. I won't tell the story here, but I do have a story. My very first night when I arrived in London, I was standing butt naked in a hostel bathroom. I had lathered up with soap to take a shower and realized that there was no shower head. And I'm standing there completely covered in suds, not knowing how I was going to get them off of me. And I said out loud, I want to go home. And I hadn't even been there 24 hours. And I contemplated going home. And what kept me from going home was the fear of being judged. And I'm so glad I didn't. I ended up somehow or another getting all those suds off of me. But I continued to travel for 3.5 months. And made my way back home after that.
Was the language kind of like the biggest hurdle, or was it just different customs? And I've always wondered how it works traveling Europe and Asia. I know you've gone to Asia a lot with the language barrier, or do enough people know English that you're able to communicate no problem?
You know, that's a question I get asked a lot. And I actually feel like the language barrier is something that is a benefit for people like me. My first landing was in London, and of course they speak English, But then, having traveled through France and Switzerland and Spain and Portugal, I'm half Mexican, so I can navigate my way in Spanish speaking cultures. But what I've found is if you speak the local language, you don't find yourself in the same predicaments that you do if you do speak the language. And part of what I write and part of who I am is rooted in human connection, and the ability to connect with people when you don't speak the same language is so much more enjoyable and potent for me.
Mm.
So I think it's always been more of a struggle in Southeast Asia, in countries where they speak tonally, where it's harder to decipher what they're saying or what they're trying to get across. But as I've said many times in my life, there's a universal language, and it's eye contact and energy. And if you can share that with another human being, even if they don't speak, you can communicate.
That's great. It's like you have to tap into being human instead of being American or English or Chinese or whatever it is that your ethnicity is in order to
Yeah,
bridge that gap.
it's tapping into energy, right? It's being able to feel, you know, how many muscles we have in our face, but we can say so many things without even having to mumble a word. And I've been in so many situations where I don't speak the language, or they don't speak the same language as I speak. And, or if I am fumbling around, I will say this. One of my number one pieces of advice for anybody is try to learn a little bit of the language of wherever you're going, because whether you can fumble or not, when the locals see you trying, they immediately want to bend over backwards to help.
Mhm.
Other than the French.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. So how did it go over with your family when you decided to, if this isn't too personal of a question, when you
Yeah,
decided to just totally break all norms and do something so completely different?
I'm very lucky. We may put the fun in dysfunctional, but I come from a very loving and supportive family. Um, the night after I met that the guy, his name's Thomas, and he told me about traveling Western Europe and how to do it. I had a yellow pad like this, and he had told me, buy this book, buy this backpack. I had a playbook, and I took it to my dad that following Saturday morning at his office, and I said, Dad, I want to do this. And I said, I don't know anything about it. I have this playbook. I met this guy, and something about it really spoke to me. And he looked at me and he said, go,
Hmm.
and don't come home until you're ready.
Mhm.
Fortunately enough for me, my dad spent 4 years in Germany in the army, and he always credited that to changing his life. He didn't have a relationship with his father, so what's the word I'm looking for? Responsibility or discipline was not something that he grew up with, and the army taught him so much that he never learned at home. But outside of the barracks, outside of the army, he got to taste exactly what has kept me doing what I'm doing: the different food and you know the languages and the money being different, and the way to survive and the way to connect. And he was my biggest supporter. He was the one, I will say, never financially. I always had to. I've done all of this on my own, but from a spiritual and from a supportive and mental and familial and love perspective, my family's always been behind me. My sister and my mom, they've always supported what I've done. Maybe they don't understand, or they wouldn't mirror it for their own life, but they've always been supportive of what I'm doing, and that's been monumental.
Yeah, that's great. So all these stories that you have from your travels, what you do, the people you meet, how those interactions go, is this what you're sharing on with Gusto for your readers
Yes,
and more?
yes. I've referred, since moving over, since transitioning to Substack, I've been calling it my digital treasure chest. It's
Mm.
where I now house and keep all of these stories of human connection and heartache and the struggles and the wins, all of the stuff that I've experienced. Because when I tell people that I've spent 20 plus years traveling, it's like, oh, that's amazing. And it's not all rainbows and butterflies. I've definitely had plenty of hiccups and struggles and questions. But I write about human connection. I write about the power of surrendering and what it means to have to trust strangers and the beauty available when you meet somebody who doesn't speak the same language, and you try to ask them a questions, or you charade them a questions, and they grab you by the wrist and they take you to where they think you want to go, and then it's not the right place, and they invite you to sit down and have tea or food, or and then that turns into connections that I still have with some of these people. And yeah, that's why I do what I do. That sort of interaction and those sorts of connections will keep me married to this lifestyle until I'm no longer here. And I feel like it's my duty as an American, because this type of travel isn't in our DNA. You being Canadian, you guys travel a hell of a lot more than we do. Australians, Mexicans, all these other Israelis, all these other cultures, they travel the world. We as Americans, we don't. Less than 50% of Americans have a passport. And when I tell that to other cultures, or when they bring that to me, they can't believe it. It's like you're limiting your access to see other parts of the world. So, yes, that's what I share about. I share about the value and the power in shared humanity.
Yeah, that's amazing. And your people love it. I think your Substack, as a new Substack, is probably one of the most active that I've seen, as far as like comments and likes and just kind of back and forth conversations. Your writing is very inviting and energizing, and people just jump right in to say their piece or share their thoughts on it as well. And that's really great to see. Have you noticed that? What have you noticed? Because I know you came from Facebook to Substack. Have you noticed a positive or negative in the interactions with your people since moving? How do you feel about that part?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a touchy subject for me, because while I appreciate your acknowledgement of having an active Substack, and I am so used to, for years on and off, I was sharing on Facebook. I took some time off of there multiple times because it just became what it is now, a little bit too much toxicity and advertisements and algorithm driven. But I can share a selfie of myself on Facebook and get 175 people to acknowledge it like that. And I can spend 6 hours, 8 hours writing, editing, rewriting, editing, posting a story on Substack, and have very little, from my experience, from my history, acknowledgement or interaction.
Mm-hmm.
So that has been a growing effort for me to not worry about how it's received, because I have had such a strong history of people who show up on other social media platforms and are willing to engage. The newsletter game is a little bit different. These are people who are interested in reading